Start recording. All right. So today is going to be a fun presentation. There's going to be a lot of science, probably more science than you guys care to learn, but that is okay. I'm going to try and leave as much time at the end for questions as possible, but if anything comes up after the fact, feel free to either just DM me on Discord or make a ticket here, and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. So today we're going to be talking about maximizing reaction time, and I'm going to be spending we're going to wait to the end, I guess, to get into kind of some key like protocol points. But I think one of the first things that I want to dive into, um, outside of introducing myself here, is who am I? Well, I studied neuroscience for 5 years in college, planned on going to medical school, and ended up launching Neuroptima, and thus why we're all here sitting in this call. I have an honors degree in neuroscience and chemistry. I've played competitive FPS games for as long as I can remember. I started competing in Call of Duty back in Black Ops 3, and have played something competitively ever since. And I've worked with players on esports consulting basis now for going on 6 years, mostly out of game stuff, like maximizing reaction time, sleep, and whatnot, but also some in game stuff, specifically in the context of Fortnite and Valorant. So the 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 overarching, I guess, conversation we'll have today is largely just going to surround Valorant, but obviously, if you guys play other games, most of this stuff is also going to be applicable to those games. Um, so the first thing I want to talk about is what is reaction time. So a lot of people, when I think of reaction time, I guess in my head, I think of just like human benchmark simple reaction time, right? Sitting in a software, and you click your mouse once, and you wait for the red screen to flash green, and you click as fast as you can, and that tells you how fast you respond. But there's actually quite a bit. It's kind of a bit of a misnomer because there's reaction times that are applicable to Valorant that aren't remotely close to simple reaction time. In fact, most of the reactions that you'll have in Valorant aren't simple reaction time. So reaction time includes mental processing, nerve conduction, movement timing, and motor preparation. So this is kind of a cool diagram. If you think of the stimuli as your game, you have visual inputs of that stimuli that travels all the way through to the back of your brain, to your sensory cortex. That then gets processed by your brain, to elicit a motor response in which you press keys, and or click a button on your mouse. All of this happens in oftentimes less than a quarter of a second. If you're really slow, then it might happen a bit faster, or a bit slower rather. But for most of us, this is all happening, under 200 milliseconds, which is cool. Just going into kind of each one of these specifically. Stimulus detection. So this is something going to be like noticing an enemy, or an event that happens in game, turning a flash, that sort of thing. Sensory processing is when the visual input or the visual signal actually reaches your brain. Decision making is choosing the right response. Do I need to turn left for the flash, or need to tuck behind the corner? Motor execution is moving your mouse, actually shooting someone, or using WASD clicking keys. And then system latency. So this is going to be how long it actually takes the signal from you clicking your mouse or clicking something on your keyboard to reach to reach the server side, or reach server side, I guess. This can be influenced by your monitor, your mouse, your frame rate, your ping, and thus why traditionally things are played on LAN when it's for a lot of money to eliminate some of that system latency. So there are different types of reaction time, as I just mentioned. First and foremost, simple reaction time. This is probably what we all think of when we think of reaction time. This is just human benchmark. Not really anything else to dive into here. Pretty straightforward. We then have choice reaction time. So this is multiple stimuli with multiple responses. So a perfect example is if a yellow square pops up, you're going to press key on your keyboard, but if a blue square appears, you're going to do nothing. Next up, we have go and no-go response. So this is going to be if, say you start with this crosshair here, if a red image pops up, you might click a button, versus if a blue image pops up, you would click a different button. So let's say the red images is tied to 1, the blue image is tied to image 2. So not only are you reacting to the stimuli, but you have to decide which button to hit on your keyboard. We then get into more in-game specific reaction times. The first one here that I'll talk about is discrimination reaction time. It's kind of hard to not be like server side and show you guys an example of this. I think the best one that I could think of was a fake clone versus a real enemy. So this is often situational when I think about it in game. It's very rare. I guess the example I give is if I'm a cipher on Haven and I'm anchoring C and I've gotten a lot of info that there's 4 or 5 players down C long. Well, then the first someone full sprinting into sight, there's a chance that it could be fake. Versus if, let's say all the players are on the A side of the map, you have information that, hey, we have 4 players A, and you hear someone sprinting up C long, and you swing and it's a Yuru, well, then you might not shoot that initially because it's like, why are we full sprinting up C long? I'm sure some of you guys can think of a lot better examples than this, but this is just what came to the top of my mind when I was thinking about it. Next, we have anticipatory reaction time, and I think anticipatory reaction time is a little bit of a misnomer here, but this is more so when you're playing in game, and it's how long it takes you to preemptively make a decision. And so a good example of this, I think, is pre-aiming the right spot. So, in this specific example here, this is just an image I pulled from Google. If a short gets smoked off here, it probably doesn't make sense to be pre-aiming that angle because you're just pre-aiming a smoke. It would make sense to move your crosshair and pre-aim the shower swing, in which case the time it takes you to decide, hey, I shouldn't be pre-aiming this, to I should be pre-aiming showers, is thus your anticipatory reaction time. It's a little bit hard to say. We then have movement and executional reaction time. This one is gated by neuromuscular transmission. So I saw a tweet, I think it was from Shopify Alexis a few weeks ago, that was talking about like shorter people having faster reaction times. That's not the case generally because this motor neurotransmission happens extremely quickly, and the the difference in a neuromuscular transmission rate is going to be very, very minuscule compared to, per se, like a visual transmission rate or auditory processing, something like that. This isn't really something that you can change outside of having like your arousal state changed. And even then you're really talking about like, less than 10 milliseconds in many cases. But this is basically how fast you execute after deciding. Uh, Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me again? All right, sick. Sorry, my mic died. We're back. Um, this is also when if you guys remember the first slide I talked about like system latency. This is something that's gonna affect its executional reaction time, but it's again outside of playing on 240 hertz or playing on a 1 millisecond reaction time monitor. I even know I follow Deddy on Twitter. Shout out Deddy. He even talks about plugging in your mouse to certain ports on your computer to eliminate stuff like this. But I would say this is the least important one out of all of these, just because it's for most players it's going to be completely out of their control unless they're playing on like a super scuff setup. Okay, so the core thesis behind maximizing reaction time is for gamers specifically, you don't need maximum arousal, you need an optimal arousal state. Here's the Yerkes-Dodson curve. This is a famous, I guess, psychological concept or theory, and it basically states that as you increase arousal, you're going to reach a certain point that's optimal, and it's really easy to spill over to this impaired performance and high arousal state, and thus why when it comes to supplementation and specifically stimulant use, you have to be really careful with not only what products you're using, but how much stimulation you're actually getting. So, this is a really cool paper, and I can link this to you guys here afterwards or at the end. This is something that we can see on the cellular level. So gamers, like again, gamers don't need maximum arousal, but finding this optimal arousal state, or I'll say the Yerkes-Dodson curve was largely a soft science or a behavioral thing that we've noticed. But in recent research, we're able to see how brain signal differently in a fatigue state versus an alert state versus a stress state. So if you're too slow, or if you have too low of a arousal, I should say too low of an arousal, your reads are going to be slow, your responses are going to be slow, you're going to have poor alertness. It's often going to lead to lazy crosshair placement and autopiloting. Whereas if your arousal state is too high, that's going to lead to things like bad decision making, tunnel vision, shaky aim, and even panic spraying, depending on your level of proficiency in the game. But I want to quickly walk through this graph because I think it's really cool. So as we can see, we have a preferred direction and a non-preferred direction, and the delay at which these happen. Um, and here we can kind of see that as alertness becomes optimal, that this delay lessens. But as you get into the um, for both noradrenaline and dopamine, as you get to the fatigue side or even the stress size, that we see this signal start to change. And so without getting too much into the weeds here, we can see this at the cellular level, and we've kind of moved beyond this Yerkes and Dodson curves and started to quantify exactly what this looks like at the neurotransmitter level. So the key takeaway here is arousal state is the performance level for reaction time. How aroused you are is directly going to determine how fast all of those reactions that we discussed at the beginning of this lecture are influenced, and how fast you're able to react. So if you're under aroused, again, you're going to be flat, bored, and foggy, and you're going to have late reactions. If you're over aroused, you're going to be tense, rush, and panic, and you're going to be reacting fast, but you're often going to be wrong. And it's where we get into this optimal arousal state that we can see that you're alert, you're calm, and you're aggressive, and your reactions are going to be fast and accurate, which is where we're going to want to be. Again, this is another cool diagram on the cellular level. Of exactly what's happening during optimal conditions versus stress conditions. And this graph isn't going to make a lot of sense to really anyone who hasn't studied like molecular medicine or biophysics. But the basis here is this signal cascade. This is outside the cell, and you're going to be getting a stimulus here. This is the stimulus being processed, and how that your cell responds to that is going to determine your psychological or your physiological response. Let's see here. I'm just peeking my notes, make sure that I'm not missing anything. So I do want to highlight a few, like, connecting this over arousal state to in game. So this is going to be something like you might be flicking faster, but you might be flicking too far, or your flicks aren't going to be accurate. You're likely to be processing information worse. A lot of times when people are over aroused, they'll overcommit to things. I think of like overheating. You know, you get the 3K and you make a bad decision because you're trying to get the ace. You're gonna be less likely to read your map. You're gonna lose some of your fine motor control, and you're gonna confuse your brain's gonna confer speed with urgency. Is there's a time to be fast and there's a time to be urgent, but those are not necessarily the same things. So the FPS reaction model. So let's actually start to applying this to in-game. Hopefully you guys enjoy my image. If you don't turn your flash, you're dead. In which case, for these are kind of the most common things that I can think of. Is reaction time matters the most when you're holding an angle, when you're clearing corners, jiggle peeking, trading, especially turning a flash, anti-flash turning, target switching, spray transferring, and then dodge and shoot situations. This one I threw on here because it's not super applicable to Valorant, but it is applicable to other games. I think of League of Legends a lot when I think of this, but I figured I'd throw it on here for shits and gigs. So when we think about optimizing reaction time, the first step in doing that is training your perception. So the big points here are, crosshair placement is one of them. If your crosshair placement is in the right place, your field of view is going to be narrowed most often, if you're a good player, on your crosshair. And in which case, what you're looking at and how fast you see that stimuli is going to directly correlate with how fast you react to it. Next up, we have visual search disciplines. So just where are you looking? Are you looking at your mini map? I'm sure we've all done that. I do it all the time, and it tilts the shit out of me to where you're holding an angle, holding an angle, holding an angle. You peek up in your mini map and you get swung. So training your perception as into like when are you looking at your mini map? When are you not looking at your mini map? When are you checking your periphery? If you're holding like a 50-50 angle, are you bouncing between them? Are you looking at your crosshair? There's a million different situations in game that this can be applicable to, but this is something that players can train. Next is enemy silhouette recognition. The thing I want to highlight here is optimal color setting. So if any of you guys follow me on Twitter, I'm sure you've seen some of my tweets about this. But humans recognize contrasting colors the best. So I always recommend, obviously if you are colorblind or have to use certain color blindness settings, you're going to want to use the ones that just allow you to see best. But I often find myself, depending on the map in Valorant, adjusting my enemy or my enemy silhouettes accordingly. On some of the more cooler maps, I tend to use warmer colors, and on some of the warmer maps like Bind, for example, I'm using a cooler color. This also is applicable to crosshair color. Is you want your crosshair color ideally to be a contrasting color to the enemies. Where this balance gets complicated is when you factor in the enemy silhouettes against the map background, and then your crosshair color versus both the enemy silhouettes and the map background. This is something that I encourage everybody to experiment with. I don't think it's a one size fits all. I personally usually play in Valorant specifically. I play with yellow enemies and either a white or a cyan crosshair. That's just me. It's not a direct, directly across this, but for most maps, in my experience, that's what works the best. But ultimately, you have to find what works best for you. Next up, we have peripheral awareness. So this is often monitor positioning. I threw this image on here. This is kind of a, oopsie, going back. This is kind of a meme image, but depending on how close you're sitting to your monitor will determine how peripherally aware you are. If you're too close, it can be a bad thing if you can't see the edge of your monitors, but that also is kind of determined by your crosshair placement to a big extent. Is if you have really good crosshair placement, you can get away with poor peripheral awareness because you're more than likely going to be looking at the right thing a majority of the time. Whereas if your crosshair placement is poor, you're going to have to, you should be spending time on crosshair placement, but you're going to have better peripheral awareness, excuse me. Next up, screen clutter. This is a big one, and something that even personally I put a big emphasis on is a lot of us have multi-monitor setups. I pretty much always rock with at least a dual monitor, if not a 3-monitor setup, in which case, if I'm competing in a match, I'll turn my other monitors completely off, or at a minimum, minimize everything on them. You don't want a bunch of visual clutter in your field of view, as that's ultimately going to slow your reaction time. And finally, we have using sound cues before visual cues. Our ears allow us to process information a lot faster than visual information. It's unfortunately just neuroscience and biology. So the biggest thing here is be mindful of not only what volume you're playing on. Don't have the volume so low to where you can't hear, like certain sound cues in the game. But also avoid music with words. I've made tweets about sometimes people use, there's research to show that certain hertz frequencies of music without words can help improve focus, but there's ultimately is a trade-off there. Is if you're listening to any external audio, you're going to be influencing your ability to hear certain sound cues, and that's going to slow down your reaction time. If you're someone who does have to listen to music or really wants to listen to music, preferentially listen to it without words. Really the worst thing that you can be doing is blasting music and to the point that you can't hear your game, but I doubt that anybody who's seriously competing is going to be in that boat. So step 2 here is decision speed. And the big takeaway here is fast players don't think harder. They just use cleaner rules. And I threw some examples on this here. If you hear steps B main, maybe you're holding a wider angle versus you're holding a tighter angle if somebody would be walking up. If your teammate contacts, or depending on your positioning, you want to be in a position with the team that you're playing on the side on or executing on, to where if your teammate contacts first, you're able to effectively swing and trade and know where you're swinging. I think about this on bind with certain smokes a lot. Depending on where utility lands, I reposition. A perfect example, I think, for me is when I'm playing on bind against a Brim. If I see Brim has ult, then I'm probably not going to play in U-Haul. Just because, there's a chance that when they execute, or if they want to run an A execute, that they're going to preemptively be all that. That's not necessarily a reaction time thing, but I do think it's applicable to decision speed, in the sense that if you're preemptively thinking about things, going back to the anticipatory reaction time, if you're preemptively thinking about things, it makes it a lot easier to make faster decisions in the moment, because you've already kind of thought about what's going to happen beforehand. And finally, if I swing and I miss this shot, am I going to counter strafe, reset? Or am I going to just continue panic spraying? Usually when this happens to me, I've played enough Valorant at this point that I can avoid panic spraying a lot of the time. But if I do catch myself panic spraying, I don't know why that word is so hard for me to say. I just get off, because at that point it's like my brain is not working correctly, and I'm not going to do that to my ranked teammates. And I couldn't think of what image to use on this slide, so I threw this little shark in Converse because he's kind of cute. Okay, step 3, we have motor execution. So big idea here is speed without tension. This is going to be things, I guess, a checklist of things to think about is your room temperature. Here's a graph from a tweet that I had a few weeks ago that talked about how when your room gets above 72 degrees, you start to see your cognitive performance decline. So make sure, or excuse me, not 72 degrees. I think it was 78 degrees. I can't remember off the top of my, let me see. It might be in my notes here. Dropped 26 degrees Celsius. So if there's any Euros in here that wants to do that reaction time conversion, that would be super helpful. But the biggest advice that I give to people is always try and game at 72 degrees or lower. To me, this is a non-negotiable. Same thing when it comes to like playing with a window opener, a fan, or having an air purifier. There are things that will sneak up on you that you might not realize, but that is a topic for another time. These other ones are kind of arbitrary for some people, but again, I figure I'd throw them on here because I think it is good knowledge. Making sure your hands are warm, you're not playing with cold hands. Playing with cold hands absolutely will slow down your reaction time. Playing with a relaxed grip rather than like death gripping your mouse. If you're death gripping your mouse, you're gonna be initiating contractions of certain muscles in your arm, hand, and wrist that can influence reaction time. Sit with a neutral posture. You don't want to be super hunched over. You don't want to be leaning back. Mouse control economy. This is more so something that you're going to want to practice, beforehand. Click timing. This one also is a bit arbitrary in the sense of when you swing, you don't want to like instantly crouch. That's kind of what I think of when I think of click timing from like a positioning standpoint. And then mouse timing, obviously not clicking until your crosshair hits their head. Counter strafe timing, if any of you guys play games, this one's pretty self-explanatory. And then avoiding unnecessary micro corrections. This is going to be something that's gets significantly worse for people who are overstimulated. But again, just something I figure I would throw on there for you guys to think about. So I want to think about for a second why reaction time fails. And reaction time can fail in a lot of different ways. It can fail from mental fatigue. So this can be like playing for too long. This is a study here that I linked to where they basically found that even for high level and experienced players, after 2 hours, we start to see a definitive drop in performance. So one way to protect your reaction time is to simply make sure you're taking the appropriate breaks, and that you're taking breaks roughly every 2 hours. And for me, what constitutes a break isn't like sitting at your desk playing your phone. Actually get up, walk around, get some steps in, go get some water, go to the bathroom, get some fresh air. All of those things are additive, and they're not only going to protect reaction time, but broadly improve cognitive performance. Visual fatigue. I often think of this at night. This is one of the reasons I'm very pro blue light glasses. This often can happen to people for just staring at a screen for too long. Low blood glucose feelings. So this is something, this can give people brain fog, give people kind of lightheadedness. If you ever notice, if you stand up and see floaters, that can be a sign of low blood sugar. Carbs are essential for cognitive performance, and if you're low glucose or low blood glucose, that is something that will definitely cause reaction time to fail. Dehydration is another big one. I wish I would have thrown my one of my favorite graphs on here. Your brain literally shrinks when you're dehydrated. Your brain's also an electrical entity in the sense that it's communicating with each other, or it's communicating with itself via chemical electrical signaling. And so if you're dehydrated, you're going to slow that signaling and thus the reaction time. Sleep debt is a huge one. If you're not getting above 7 hours of sleep on average every single night, this is likely influencing your reaction time. I'm sure some of you guys saw my tweet a month or so ago where I was working with a pro player, B-Dog, and his sleep was absolutely cooked. And literally over the span of about 30 days, we dropped his reaction time almost 30 milliseconds just by optimizing his sleep. So that's a big one. And then finally, emotional tilt. This one is a bit more arbitrary in the sense that some people tilt worse than others, but the more that you tilt, or if you are very tilted, that is ultimately going to have an effect on your reaction time because your brain is, upset and not focused on being objective and playing well in game. Um, Sleep nukes reaction time so much that I made it its own slide. This graph over here is showing showing creatine saving cognitive performance under sleep deprivation. Generally, I recommend if you're not getting 7 hours at least of sleep a night, you probably should be taking about 10 grams of creatine a day. This study specifically found that you need to take around 25 grams of creatine. I'm using that as a round because they do it on a gram per kilogram dose level. But I think that if sleep is something people struggle with and you're looking to maximize your reaction time, one of the best things you can do for that is just start taking creatine regularly. The key takeaways here is sleep is going to nuke cognitive performance across the board, specifically reaction time, makes you slower, less consistent. The big things to avoid here are don't VOD review in bed. I talked to someone the other day that was like, oh, like they read that like you encode things, better right before you sleep because then you sleep and kind of commit them to memory. This is counterproductive when it comes to things on screens, especially VODs, because it's often going to have a detrimental effect on your melatonin production, in which case it's going to hurt your sleep. So I always aim to VOD review. If you're someone who does VOD review at night, at least give yourself an hour bare minimum. I recommend 2 to 3 hours afterwards off of screens before you go to bed, as it's actually going to increase your ability to encode this into memory a lot better because it's just going to lead to better sleep. Keep a consistent wake, and I should have put wake and going to bed time here. I use the term circadian rhythm. Getting 7 hours of sleep is essential, but it's even more important or even more effective when you're doing it at the same time every day. I usually tell people aim to go to bed anywhere after it's dark, and don't sleep in too far into the morning. So the timeline that I usually use is fall asleep or get your 7.5 to 9 hours in between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. I think 9 a.m. is even stretching it a lot of times. I think the optimal schedule, depending on your work and other obligations, is to aim to go to bed sometime between 10 and midnight and wake up sometime between 8 a.m. or 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. And then finally, avoid caffeine late before bed. This is kind of just a no-brainer. I kind of use the 8-hour rule, but depending on how fast and how used to you are to metabolizing caffeine, some people can get away with a little less. So I'll end with optimizing the 3 performance levelers. I think when I think about this, the problem when it comes to making drastic changes or trying to like completely overhaul your routine all in one swoop is a lot of people don't conform to it, or they can't be consistent with it. So if you're looking to optimize your reaction time, rather than trying to do all of these things at once, I recommend starting with one of these categories, doing that, mastering it, doing it consistently for at least a week, and then moving to another one. First and foremost, we have low latency or environment. Um, this is going to be more or less optimizing your. Sorry, my notes monitor shut off for a second. Okay, it's back on. I must have kicked the wire. Oopsie. This is going to largely be peripheral based, so playing on 240 hertz plus, making sure your PC can consistently run Valorant or whatever game you're playing at that hertz latency, making sure you're using the most up-to-date peripherals with laser activation switches. Like I use an Apex Pro TKL. I play on the point 0.1 millimeter actuation, all of that jazz. Clean visual field. This is both from a monitor standpoint and a desk standpoint. Playing with a super cluttered desk can often influence people's performance, but it's most importantly from a monitor perspective. And then stable posture, grip, and desk position. So the big thing that I'll note here is just consistency in setup. So you want to sit the same, you want to play with the same grip, and you want to have your desk in the same position every time. Don't stand up and play one day and sit down and play the other day, and try always change around your keyboard and change around your mice and that sort of thing. That's ultimately going to hurt reaction time. Next up, we have diet, nutrition, and supplementation. So hydrate before you feel slow. One of the best things I think people can do for performance is get up and drink a glass of water. Even better if you're drinking a glass of water with electrolytes. Most people, or nobody that I know of, can actively drink in their sleep unless for whatever reason they're like dripping an IV or something, which I have no idea why anybody would do. So most people are the most dehydrated in the morning. Being dehydrated will absolutely nuke your reaction time, just like sleep. So make sure you're hydrating before you feel thirsty, as you reach a level of dehydration that'll impact your performance well before you physiologically feel thirsty. Eat for stable energy, not crashes. This is a big thing when it comes to carbs. Don't eat a bunch of sugar and candy. As we mentioned earlier, you don't want low blood glucose, but my favorite carb source when it comes to this type of stuff is oatmeal. You don't want to eat a ton of it because then you're going to be digesting it all day. But oatmeal is nice because it doesn't spike blood sugar. And actually, one of my favorite hacks for this too is if any of you guys are hash brown guys, potatoes, you can, if you cook potatoes and cool them and then reheat them, or even eat them cold, it gives you the carbs you need without spiking your blood sugar, which in turn can be a very stable energy source, and avoid kind of sugar crashes for people that get them. And then finally, use caffeine and nootropics. I'll say caffeine or other stimulants to sharpen and not overstimulate. This is a big thing for me. Is I see so many people using energy drinks, abusing Adderall, and always trying to, I guess, stimulant max, thinking it's going to maximize their reaction time. I don't think it's a good strategy because for a lot of people, they end up spilling into that overstimulation, which is ultimately going to hurt performance. And then finally, we have sleep and session time. So prioritize sleep over extra reps, rather than staying up all night playing a game. You're just so much better getting a good night of sleep. I think that this is probably the most important thing on here. Is if your sleep's bad, your reaction time is going to be bad. Warm up before ranked. This is obvious, but I threw this on here because I can't tell you how many times I've played a game of Valorant, and seen one of my teammates full whiff, and then they're basically like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to warm up," type shit. So yeah, don't be those teammates. Please make sure you're getting in there and properly warming up. And then play your hardest matches during your best energy window. Obviously, the hard part with this is if you have other obligations, if you have work, if you have school. But for most people, like for me specifically, if I were to pick an optimal time to play, it would probably be in between like 10 a.m. And 2 p.m. for me. That's just when I'm typically on my shit, and properly stimulated. Yet for me, because I'm so busy, I often don't find myself playing at night. So do what I say, not what I do in that regard. Um, but I guess finally we finished this. Is this honestly is when I was formulating flow state. This is exactly the type of thing that I formulated this product for. By no means do I want this to feel like an aimless shill, but in terms of the ingredients within flow state, I mean this is built for this. You have things like our dual phase caffeine system, so you're not getting overstimulated. And not only are you not getting overstimulated, once you reach that optimal arousal standpoint. It keeps you there for longer. And a good representation of this is this graph is our current flow state version, flow state v4, has this exact stimulant profile with a little bit of added theobromine. So as you can see, you're getting into the zone, this optimal stimulation bar here around hour 1, and you're staying there all the way through hour 6. Whereas something like an energy drink, you're getting into the zone faster, but you're way overshooting it, and you actually spend about 3 hours, 3.5 hours of your time overstimulated. And it's not until you get to hours 4 through 8 that you're effectively in that optimal stimulation zone. The problem with this is as you can see, this is a very sharp curve. So this is what's often going to cause people to crash. Whereas with something that's flatter like this, you don't end up crashing at the end. So for a lot of people, if you've tried flow state or use it, you'll notice that you feel really good all the way through that hour 6, and then afterwards it kind of just tapers off. Whereas like for me, when I drink an energy drink, I do kind of feel this. I get super wired, but then I ultimately end up crashing from it. And then just some other ingredients to highlight. We have L-Theanine. The dose that's included in flow state is 200 milligrams. In studies, that's been shown to increase alpha brain wave activity in the brain, which is going to lead to fast reaction time, or does lead to fast reaction time. My favorite ingredient in the whole formula, new level, increases cerebral blood flow to the brain. More blood in your brain means it's getting more nutrients, it's getting more oxygen. You're going to be able to react faster and make faster decisions. Same with alpha GPC. Alpha GPC is a super bioavailable acetylcholine precursor. That is more so on the faster mental processing and the decision side. So if we go back up to this graph, that is going to be here. Whereas L-theanine and caffeine is largely going to be here. And acetylcholine, alpha GPC are I guess kind of both in this motor response as well, because acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that your body's using to send those neuromuscular transmissions. So if you haven't got a chance to try flow state, shoot me a DM. Make sure to get you some samples in the mail because I think that it's fantastic. But otherwise, I will leave you guys with any questions. Feel free, you can type them, or let me scroll up and see if I missed any. Um, mm, mm, mm. Does the Yerkes-Dodgson curve account for tolerance buildup, or more of a concept of being at the right amount of stimulus? It does not account for tolerance buildup. And so that's where I was saying earlier, like, this is kind of this is like a psychological concept. But it's more so just to like visualize that this inverse U curve exists. But there is data, showing, and let me link this paper in here for you guys to check out. Let it redirect. There is starting to see some very cool I call it molecular neuroscience. I don't know if that's still what it's called. Back when I started college, there was behavioral neuroscience and molecular neuroscience. This Yerkes-Dodgson curve is very much on the behavioral neuroscience side. Whereas like when we get into the applied neuroscience and the molecular neuroscience, we are seeing this at the cellular level. Zeke talks about how game audio is more important than hearing your teammates' comms. I would tend to agree with that, especially in a rank setting, just because, like, sometimes people want to, like, backseat, and that's going to hurt your performance. But yes, I would tend to agree with that statement, outside of, like, I guess, like a pro setting. What is creatine supplementing for when you miss sleep? Does the brain create creatine as you sleep? Yes. So, let me see here. Where was my slide? So when think of your neurons as microcapacitors, or like little batteries. When you sleep, they effectively recharge. And creatine is like the energy buffer in your brain. So, it's what helps convert ADP or like pre-fuel into ATP or active fuel that you can use for energy. And so when you're low on creatine, you're at a lower energy brain state. And if you're not getting sleep, you're not able to appropriately or effectively recharge those neurons. And so what creatine does is it basically provides your brain with a substrate to allow it to buffer energy better. And in a lot of cases, when people are sleep deprived, that is like the biggest or one of the biggest cognitive deficits is just bad energy buffering. And so that's the biggest reason to take creatine in this sense. Screens at night, options on opinions on Kindles. I think Kindles are better than like iPhone screens or screens, but they're still not super great. I actually believe. Let me go to X.com. Let me find this. Mm-mm-mm. Is this it? No. I actually believe the study that I used in the tweet. Yeah, this. I believe this was on Kindles. Yeah, e-readers. I can't remember off the top of my head if it was Kindles specifically or if it was e-readers, but this is that study if you want to take a peek. Let's see if I missed anything else. Okay. Well, like I said, if any of you guys have questions that arise after the fact,